Today we are going to be talking about the Space Wolves, but even though this is a separate video that is dedicated to the Space Wolves index, I'm not going to go over all the data cards because that index has 78 pages on its own, which is frankly ridiculous. So we are going to pick out the most interesting data cards and talk about them. Other than that, we are going to go over the base rules and discuss them a little bit. If you enjoy the content, consider leaving a thumbs up and subscribing, as well as checking the links down in the description below if you want to join us over on Discord and talk a little bit about your Warhammer army, post your army over there and so on. Or you can follow me over on Twitter for any kind of updates on uploads or on just general Warhammer 40,000 stuff. My name is Senpai, and this is Senpai of Wargames. So we already went over the Space Wolf detachment rule. It is incredible. There are some restrictions. Your army can include Space Wolves unit, but it cannot include any Adeptus Astartes units drawn from any other chapter, which is the baseline you have come to expect. Your army cannot include any of the following units: Tactical Squad, Assault Squad, and so on, because you have your own. When it comes to the deeds worthy of Saga, we literally went over all of them. I think they are good. Some of them are very difficult to get. The Saga of the Warrior Born. This saga is completed if one or more Adeptus Astartes character models from your army destroyed one or more enemy character models. This one seems like one of the easier ones, and the benefit you're getting is definitely strong because it applies to all melee weapons. Saga of Majesty reads, this one is completed if you control one or more objective marker in your opponent's deployment zone. While this can be doable with Deep Strike or just putting units in reserves, it is still quite difficult to get this one because you need to control one or more objective markers. It's not just enough to stand there. But the benefit is rather strong. Improve the objective control characteristic of Adeptus Astartes models from your army by 1. This is an incredibly strong buff, especially on an army that is usually a little bit more elite and thus may struggle with objective control. This one is going to make it very, very easy to hold your objectives. Saga of the Bear. This saga is completed if one or more Adeptus Astartes character models from your army were reduced to below half of their starting number of wounds during the end of the battle round. So this is going to force your opponent to understand, for one, this rule. If you're a player, you should be fair enough to say that this exists, and then your opponent is probably always going to try, whenever they attack a character with precision attacks and so on, to take that character out. If they fail, you get this one, and it says models from your army have a feel no pain of 6 up. And I frankly don't have to explain why this is strong, because feel no pain just, works for any kind of damage you're getting. Hazardous weapons, psychic, mortal wounds, whatever you're getting, you're going to be able to roll a feel no pain type save. Last but not least, we have the Saga of the Beast Slayer. This saga is completed if one or more Adeptus Astartes character models from your army have destroyed one or more enemy monster vehicle models. This is easily possible, especially for the Space Wolves. They have a ton of characters, they have a ton of dreadnoughts that hit very, very hard, even at range, and thus the Saga of the Beast Slayer, if you build your army around it, can be very, very easily completed. And the benefit is, melee weapons equipped by Adeptus Astartes models from your army have lethal hits. So while this detachment rule is technically speaking not active for the first 1 or possibly 2 turns, once you have 1 or 2 of them going, your army is going to be incredibly strong, incredibly fast. So it all depends on how the games are going to go. We are going to have to test this one extensively to see how easy or how difficult it is to trigger these. But for now, I'm going to say that during the course of a game, it is going to be average to trigger 2 of these. Next up, we are going to be talking about stratagems. While basic Space Marines are going to reward you for being in the right doctrine, and Dark Angels are going to reward you for being battle shocked, the Space Wolves are going to reward you for completing your, deeds or sagas even more. So depending on the stratagem, they are going to be better. The first stratagem here is Armor of Contempt. It is baseline. We are not going to talk about this one, but we have Go for the Throat. This one says, until the end of the phase, improve the armor penetration characteristic of melee weapons equipped by models in your unit by 1. If the Saga of the Beast Slayer has been completed by your army until the end of the phase, such weapons have the Lance ability as well. And this is going to be the standard for all the other stratagems here. Runic Wards, for example, reads, until the end of the phase, models in your unit have a feel no pain of 5 up against mortal wounds and psychic attacks. And if the Saga of the Bear has been completed by your army, until the end of the phase, models in your unit have a 4 up feel no pain against mortal wounds and psychic attacks instead. So they're just improving them even further, rewarding you even more for, completing these sagas. Death Howl reads until the end of the phase. Each time a model in your unit makes a consolidation move, it can move up to 6 inches instead of 3, provided your unit ends that consolidation move in unit coherency within engagement range of one or more enemy units. In addition, if the Saga of Majesty has been completed by your army, each enemy unit within 6 inches of your unit when it ends the consolidation move must take a battle shock test. This is a hefty improvement, and 6 inches is no joke. Then we have Warrior Pride. Select one saga that has not been yet completed by your army. Until the end of the turn, models in your character's unit have the benefit of selected saga as if it had been completed by your army. So here GW wants you to save up some CP, maybe across turn 1 or 2, and then have 3 or 4 of them at your disposal, and then combine Warrior Pride with, like, for example, Death Howl or Go for the Throat and so on. This seems like a really good stratagem to have, and it synergizes well with the rest of the army. Last but not least, we have Relentless Assault. Until the end of the turn, your unit is eligible to shoot even though it fell back or advanced this phase. If the Saga of the Warrior Born has been completed by your army until the end of the turn, your unit is also eligible to declare a charge. So this is basically you can do it all when it comes to movement, and it is an excellent stratagem, especially if you have the Saga of the Warrior Born completed. So I can see Warrior Pride and Relentless Assault being combined quite a lot. The stratagems themselves are a little bit on the weaker side in my opinion, but once you activate the saga that is corresponding to the stratagem, it is going to be very, very strong. So yeah, you're basically depending on your detachment rule here and how easy it is to clear. A lot of people are, a little bit concerned that it is going to be a little bit too difficult to trigger some of them. But at the same time, you have to strike a careful balance between activating too many too easily and, too few, and it is too difficult. And at the end of turn 4, you maybe have one of them active, which would frankly not be ideal. So we'll have to wait and see for now. Then we have the enhancements for the space. So we have the Pelt of Beowulf, which reads adapted to status model only. At the start of the fight phase, each enemy unit within an engagement range of the bearer must take a battle shock test. This is a fine little enhancement. Depending on how many units you're going to have in your engagement range, you're going to be triggering this multiple times. But realistically speaking, and speaking from experience, you're usually going to be in engagement range with one unit, and that's that. So the Pelt of the Beowulf is kind of mediocre. The Wolftail Talisman reads, adapted to status model only. Each time an attack is allocated to the bearer, subtract 1 from the damage characteristic of that attack. Keep in mind that this is only for the bearer and not for the entire unit. At least that is how I read it. So, I don't know. This one is kind of meh as well. If it would have been for the entire unit, it would have been clearly too strong. But for one model, it is a little bit too weak. There should have been some kind of bonus like, I don't know, give it sustained hits or something, the same model, or give it a better feel no pain or something else that goes along with this, because on one model, this seems too weak. Black Death reads, adapted to status model only. The bearer's melee weapons have the anti-monster and anti-vehicle abilities. This one seems a lot more interesting, especially considering most of your units are very strong melee killers, and having that anti-monster and anti-vehicle ability is going to definitely help you to win these no problem at all. Last but not least, we have Frost Weapon, and this one reads, the bearer's melee weapon have the precision ability, and the strength and armor penetration characteristic of those weapons are improved by 1. This is, in my opinion, the strongest upgrade, because not only is precision very, very helpful, it also boosts your strength and armor penetration. And this one feels like a strong enhancement simply because it ticks more boxes than just one, like the Beowulf, Wolf Talisman, or the Black Death. So yeah, compared to Frost Weapon, the other 3 seem a little bit weaker. They're not super bad or anything, but compared to the other indices we've seen, I wouldn't say that these are my favorite. When we talk about data cards, we have to talk about Logan Grimnar, because I think he's going to be an auto-include for Space Wolves. You can either bring him on a sled or without, but the unit inherently is going to be very, very similar. What you're losing without the sled is a little bit movement and a little bit of toughness and, base stats basically. But when it comes to your weapons, you're getting an additional flurry of teeth and claws from your wolves, and you're changing the leader chart of what your Logan Grimnar can lead. On foot, he can obviously lead any kind of firstborn unit. In contrast with the Storm Rider, he is able to lead Thunderwolf Cavalry, which is fine in and of itself. But I suspect that Logan Grimnar is going to be better without the Storm Rider, simply because he's going to be significantly cheaper that way. And you're taking him not for his offensive profile, not for his movement, not for his buffs, but simply for the ability called High King of Fenris. Once per battle, in your charge phase, this model can use this ability. If it does, until the end of the turn, you can reroll charge rolls made for Adeptus Astartes units from your army, and until the end of the turn, each time an Adeptus Astartes model from your army makes a melee attack, you can reroll the hit roll. This ability applies to your entire army for a single turn. This is incredibly strong, and thus I consider Logan Grimnar, unless he's grossly overcosted, but if that is not the case, even if the costs are kind of the High King of Fenris ability is probably going to turn around games, or at least help you take out key targets in a manner that I've not seen any other unit have. Even Guilliman and even kind of units like the Lion or what else we've seen from the bigger units do not have an ability that has this impact. Yes, it is once per battle, but you just need it once to work. And if it works once, and if you've positioned yourself efficiently, this single ability, this single turn can win you the game. It's as simple as that. High King of Fenris, incredibly strong. Other than that, you also get the Great Wolf. Each time this model destroys an enemy unit, you gain 1 CP. Because why not? And his offensive profile is not bad, no matter if he's on foot or on the Storm Rider. On the Storm Rider, he gets an additional point of, toughness, as we said, and so on, and also the flurry of teeth and claws. But overall, Logan Grimnar, in my opinion, simply because of the High King of Fenris ability, seems like an auto-include to me. Next up, we are going to be talking about Beyond the Fell-Handed. This is a very iconic dreadnought for the Space Wolves, and thus I wanted to cover it. We are talking about base set line for a dreadnought T9, 8 wounds, a save of 2 up, but this one has a feel no pain of 5 up, which is going to make it significantly more durable. Furthermore, we have Legendary Tenacity, which reads, each time an attack is allocated to this model, half the damage characteristic of that attack. So Beyond the Fell-Handed is going to survive multiple, quite hard-hitting attacks. He's not invincible, but Feel No Pain together with Legendary Tenacity and a very solid 2-up save is going to be very, very durable. Then we have Ancient Tactician. Once per battle, after your opponent uses a stratagem, this model can use this ability. If it does, until the end of the battle, increase the stratagem's cost to your opponent by 1. So you're going to vect, basically, as we've said in 9th edition, your opponent's stratagem. Very strong, very useful, and probably a reason to take this one, especially matchup dependent. There are going to be armies that have a single stratagem that is going to carry them throughout most of their games, and at that point, Beyond the Fell-Handed is going to be very helpful. But as we already said, Beyond the Fell-Handed is also very tanky, has strategic options, and not only that, he has also some of the strongest kind of offensive options out there. He has the option to take a Twin Last Cannon, Multi-Melter, Hellfrost Cannons, Heavy Plasma Cannon, Through Claw, Lethal Hits, 6 attacks, Strength 12, AP minus 2, damage 3. Beyond the Fell-Handed is no joke. It all depends on points, as always. I'm going to repeat myself here. But when it comes to just flexibility and being a jack of all trades, Beyond the Fell-Handed has definitely convinced me and surprised me here a little bit. Ancient Tactician is strong, Legendary Tenacity is strong, a Feel No Pain of 5 up is strong. The weapon options are super high variety, and you can basically kit him out to deal with anything. And the melee option is going to shred through anything, except for a monolith maybe. But most vehicles, this is going to have no problem chewing through. So Beyond the Fell-Handed looks very, very solid. Next up, we have Ragnar Blackmane. This one is a newer model, also primarified, and thus I wanted to talk about it. The wounds characteristic here is a little bit lower than what we've expected, 5 wounds. Everything else is what you expect. He's carrying a basic bolt pistol, but that is not the star of the show. Star of the show is Frostfang. Sustained hits 1, 8 attacks at weapon skill 2, strength 6, AP minus 3, damage 2. But thankfully, Battle Lust, one of his abilities, read, each time this model ends a charge move until the end of the turn, add 2 to the attacks and strength characteristics of this model's Frostfang. So we are talking about 10 attacks at strength 8, AP minus 3, damage 2. This is going to be an incredible weapon. Basic Space Marines, Intercessors for example, are going to die in hordes. You're easily going to kill 5 of them. And with sustained hits 1, you're even going to get more attacks out of this one. So Ragnar Blademane, offensively speaking, is very, very strong, no matter what you put him up against, unless it's a model that has a toughness of above 10. At that point, it gets a little bit dicey. That ability is Warhole. While this model is leading a unit, that unit is eligible to declare a charge in a turn in which it advanced. So not only is Ragnar Blademane incredibly strong and potent in melee, he is also supporting his melee friends that he's with him and that are his shield in the best way possible, namely just getting them into melee and not allowing your opponent to shoot on them that easily. Very strong, and he's able to lead almost anything. Actually, it is very surprising that Ragnar Blademane can lead units like Wolfguard, Bloodclaws, or Grey Hunters, considering they are firstborn, while Ragnar's obviously a Primaris unit. But he can also lead Assault Intercessors, Blade Guard Veterans, and an Intercessor squad. So he has the entire flexibility. He is one of the only models that can lead both firstborn and Primaris units, which is definitely something very unique. And that makes Ragnar Blademane a very, very interesting choice for your army. The Wolfgang Terminators are just basic Terminators. There's really not much to talk about them. The Hounds of Morkai we already discussed, so I'm going to skip over them as well. But there are some units that I still want to talk about, like Wulfen and Thunderwolf Cavalry. So let's start with the Wulfen. I will try to not compare them to their old data card or data sheet, simply because the Wulfen were always a rather troubled unit when it comes to their balancing. Either they were way too hard hitting and very, very strong, or they were just forgotten and no one cared about them. And thus I want to look at them and their data card and their stats with a fresh pair of eyes. So what do we have here? We have an 8-inch movement, toughness 5, a save of 4 up, 2 wounds, leadership of 6, and an OC of 0. So the OC of 0 is very interesting. Let's see if the abilities kind of, explain this a little bit. We have a Feel No Pain of 6 up, paired with a 4 up save and a toughness of 5. That is not that bad actually. Then we have Death Frenzy. Each time a model in this unit is destroyed by a melee attack, if that model has fought this phase, roll 1d6 on a 4 up, do not remove it from play, and then it can attack. So it can fight on death. Very useful, especially on a unit that is quite hard hitting. We are talking about 6 attacks in melee. And then Storm Shield, the bearer has a 4 up invulnerable save. So if you wanted to, you could make your Wulfen very, very tanky. But if you want to make the maximum use of Death Frenzy, or if you want to just play them super offensively, the claws are definitely not bad. But I assume that most people are just going to take the hammer, even though the hammer is significantly weaker. The base stat line is the same, 5 minus 1, 1, but the attacks number is reduced by 2. So last but not least, we have the ranged weapon, which is a Stormfying Auto Launcher with Assault and Blast, both very good abilities, especially for a forward pushing unit. We're talking about D6 attacks at Ballistic Skill 5, Strength 4, AP 0, Damage 1. Sadly, this particular ranged weapon is probably going to be a waste of time most of the time. If you're targeting this specific weapon at Guardsmen or at, Adeptus Mechanicus Vanguards or something, at that point it might be worth it. But if you're targeting this at anything that has toughness 5 or at anything that has a 2 up, 3 up save, this is most likely just going to do nothing. So yeah, you're not going to hit to begin with, and then once you hit, the weapon is weak. So I don't really see the point of this weapon, except for the weakest units you can find on the battlefield. So not that convinced. So all in all, this data card in specific seems a little bit mixed. The Wulfen seem like a melee unit that does have a decent-ish melee profile, but, fighting on death, baseline, not bad either. I'm not going to argue that. But for a melee dedicated unit, because the ranged weapon is just so bad, their melee profile is just not good enough. The melee weapons need to be a little bit better, even if it's just an additional AP or maybe a pip of strength more, because as it stands, strength 5, AP minus 1, damage 1 is not useful against anything unless it has 1 wound or unless the save is already at least a 4 up. And yeah, that is just not good enough in my opinion. Defensively speaking, Wulfen can be very surprising though. And last but not least, we are going to talk about the Thunderwolf Cavalry. We are talking about 10-inch movement, T6, a save of 3 up, 4 wounds, leadership of 6, and an OC of 2. With 4 wounds and a toughness of 6 and a save of 3 up, as well as an invulnerable shield if you equip them with the Storm Shield, we are almost talking about character level defensive stats with a baseline unit that can have a leader, which is very impressive. Then we have Oath of Moment, obviously, and then we have Ferocious Charge. Each time this unit makes a charge move until the end of the turn, add 1 to the damage characteristic of melee weapons equipped by models in this unit. And an ability like this one would have been very helpful for Wulfen. Just now that I read it, it would have made sense. Now, what melee weapons do we have? We have Crushing, Teeth, and Claws, which are extra attacks, 3 of them. We're talking about Strength 5, AP -1, Damage 1. Funny how the baseline stat is the same, but the Teeth and Claws are only hitting on 4s, but if you're charged, they suddenly do 2 damage and are very, very scary. And you can even add your heirloom weapons on top of that with 4 attacks, Strength 5, AP -1, Damage 1, but if you've charged, they can take out intercessors, no problem. And this is what makes Thunderwolf Cavalry a lot better in my eyes. While the defensive profiles of both of them are somewhat similar, you know, the Wulfen have a worse save, but they have a Feel No Pain type save. They both can have an invulnerable save of 4 up, so they're somewhat similar. The offensive profile and just the additional movement and the OC of 2 and so on makes Thunderwolf Cavalry so much more interesting and exciting. As always, it depends on points. If Wulfen are very, very cheap, it could make them way better. But as it stands, I really like the Thunderwolf Cavalry's datasheet and the special rules with Ferocious Charge. This is going to improve them quite significantly. When it comes to the ranged weapons, they are baseline. You can just look at them and we already know what to expect. And it is all I wanted to talk about for the Space Wolves for now. My impression on them is quite positive, but it all depends on how easy or how impossible it is to trigger those sagas later on in the game and how many you're going to have active on average, especially in a competitive environment. So we are going to have to wait and see. The Space Wolves are one of the indices that is going to be a more kind of up in the air, quote unquote, when it comes to me evaluating it. Obviously, without points and any kind of context, it is difficult to begin with. But the Space Wolves are even more so difficult to truly evaluate. So for now, I'm going to say that I have a good feeling about them. Most of their data cards and especially characters are quite impressive. Their enhancements are a little bit meh. But, you know, if you can trigger 2 of these sagas easily, and maybe if you are a very talented player, you can trigger a 3rd one, that would be very, very strong. So let's wait and see for the Space Wolves for now. If you have any units that you want to talk about that I've maybe didn't talk about in this video and you wanted to share your opinion on them, drop all of that down in the comments below. You're not only going to educate me, but also other fellow Space Wolves players and maybe new players to the faction. Other than that, if you have any questions about any of the units or the index, or if I've misunderstood any kind of rule or if I misinterpreted them or something, drop all of that down in the comments below and I'll try to answer you. Other than that, I hope this video was insightful and I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.